All right, so our goal is to share strategies for how each of us can cultivate place-based intergenerational relational design in a collaborative way and in a way that might span different social systems or sectors within our communities. And so we'll see if we can explain the project a little bit and address any interests of yours and see how it aligns. We were just going to share the story, the history of the work that we've been doing, talk a little bit about social systems changes, our findings from some of the research we've done on this process so far, and then share from diverse perspectives, not just from the faculty members involved, but also our student community perspectives, and explore the way that these projects could scale over time, and then open it up for conversation. And a lot of this is informed by work on relational change making. And we had this recently published book on relationality that really is informing the way we see this and is a part of the storytelling work that we've been doing as a part of this initiative, that we need to remember our pasts and our places in order to think together about what we want the future to be moving forward. And so with that, I think we have some videos and links we can share with you, but I think we were going to move past those, Dr. Marshall, to talk a little bit more about the history of this. So I'm going to turn it over to him.
We can always come back to some of those videos if anyone's interested later. But for now, for those who are in attendance or maybe who might be watching later, we wanted to share a little bit of background about the Power in Place Collaborative. Power in Place Collaborative is a collective of faculty, students, and staff at Elon University here in North Carolina, and a growing number of community organizations that we work together in collaboration. So our mission is to examine the power-laden processes of place production and to cultivate participatory practices of community co-creation. There's a lot in that statement, but basically that just means that we're interested in exploring the hidden histories of how this place that we live in and work in came to be, with all of its divisions and inequalities, but also its community assets and strengths, and to work to repair some of those divisions and to cultivate a more caring and inclusive community in the present and going forward. So to tell you a little bit about what that community looks like, where we are here in the Piedmont, central North Carolina, this is a racial dot map of the Elon Burlington area in Alamance County in North Carolina. The blue circle is the circle around Elon Community Campus. You can see the kind of concentration of blue dots there. That represents the fact that Elon University is a predominantly white institution in a prominently white and affluent part of the greater Elon, Burlington kind of conurbation in West Burlington. The pink circle surrounds downtown Burlington, and the blank spaces in the map represent the places where people don't live, because through a process of urban renewal over several decades, what had been a thriving downtown central business district, including a Black economic district called the Black Bottom, had been systematically dismantled over time, starting in the Jim Crow era of the 1920s and 30s, but really intensifying in the 60s and 70s during urban renewal, in which many of those buildings, which were Black rented but not Black owned, were dismantled, and new civic infrastructure was built, including the city police department. The green circle represents the predominantly Black and Latino areas of East Burlington, and which are divided, as you can see, by a four-lane highway as well as railroad tracks, dividing a predominantly white West Burlington and a predominantly Black and Latino East Burlington. And the center of that is Rawhut Street, where many of those Black businesses had been relocated. And so Rawhut Street became a thriving, Black entrepreneurial business-owned area in East Burlington, but also over time became negatively associated with crime through the local media. So part of our mission with working with the African American Cultural Arts and History Center has been to change some of those narratives and to start to repair some of those divisions. Just to give you an idea of the consequences of these divisions, there's a 10-year life expectancy difference between East and West Burlington. So you cross those tracks, you cross that four-lane highway, and the structural and environmental racism results in that life expectancy difference. But going ahead to talk about the vision and history of how this project came to be, it really is the vision of a woman named Jane Sellers, the late founding director of the African American Cultural Arts and History Center. And at the time that we met back in 2017, there was no physical space yet for the African American Culture Arts and History Center. And Ms. Jane Sellers was running walking tours and driving tours of the Rawhut Street area and East Burlington area, trying to create space for historical narratives of that community that pay tribute to the civil rights leaders who lived there, the histories of, again, Black business ownership and historically Black schools that had been founded there. And she was also running pop-up exhibits in libraries around the county. And so when we met, we wanted to see how could Elon University with its resources and Elon students with their various skills and energies contribute to this project of creating space for these stories and also starting to create some connections across difference. So we came up with a project in which students would conduct oral history interviews with elders in the community. And rather than just archive those stories to be put away in, an archive that maybe community members wouldn't be able to access, instead transforming those oral history interviews into short digital stories which could be shared with the public and celebrated, again, to create greater awareness of these counter stories of place. And so this began as a pilot project in fall 2018 with a geography course called Power, Place, and Memory. And sadly, not long after the conclusion of that project, Miss Sellers passed away. But her daughter Shanice took over the organization as a new director. There was a time of transition. Danielle came in and other faculty members at Elon who had an interest in community-based learning. We also got connected with Miss Bobby Ruffin, who was then the director of the Mako Bigelow Center at North Park being another really important community center in the East Burlington area. It was the historically Black park and pool during the era of segregation and has since been transformed into a community center that attracts people from throughout the city. And so the Design Center at Elon, students and faculty, Bobby Ruffin, Shanice Sellers, and James Shields, who was also brought on to the African American Culture Arts and History Center. We kind of relaunched this project as a collaboration called the Power and Place Collaborative. We had our second or first really official iteration of this project planned out as COVID was hitting. So we had to pivot, as was the buzzword at the time, to a virtual platform. And there was this pause at the time of, is this really the right time to do this? Can we do this safely? Is it responsible and ethical to do this project? And the sense from the community was that it was more important now than ever to create these connections across difference and across geographic divisions, especially as we were all socially and physically isolated, and as well as to capture and preserve these stories of elders in the community. So with some of the enthusiasm that we generated through that first official Power in Place collaborative digital storytelling and oral history project, the project really grew from there to expand to a number of different courses and other projects. We'll just go ahead and move on to that next slide. So starting from that first initial pilot project in 2018, we've moved on to other courses, service capstone learning projects, an iMedia and grant writing courses, a Power in Place or Power, Place, and Memory honors course. Art history was brought on, writing for visual media, arts administration, contemporary arts and issues in African art, design thinking, literacy and power, global migrations, groups and communities. So as we have added new partners who I'll talk about momentarily, we've also added new faculty members, new courses. So it's really become an ecosystem of support for this project. Some of our community storytellers include government officials, nonprofit leaders, business entrepreneurs, artists and activists, Parks and Rec officials, emergency first responders, and faith leaders. From the very beginning of this project, we were interested in, yes, creating space for counter stories that celebrate Black history in Burlington, but also the many, many diverse stories of Alamance County and Burlington. So again, we've outreached and joint partnership with faith organizations representing historically Black churches, rural churches, a partnership with our local mosque, the Burlington Masjid, and Latino serving institutions and faith organizations.
What's been really exciting about the project as well is that it continues to evolve and create change and generate projects and outputs that look very different across the last 5 years. So it began with archiving these local oral histories. Very few stories of this place have been captured in the past and from very few perspectives, but it's grown from there to create community-led digital stories that can be watched in the coffee shop, at the libraries, in the local schools, right? As well as community poster campaigns that are spreading the word. And so we have murals at the coffee shop and in some of our local restaurants. We have them built into our county parks. We have them on and off campuses and at the different schools and different centers. We also have done a lot of walking tours to better understand the local communities and what's happened, why the place has been constructed and built and designed the way it has been over time. We've been doing educational workshops both at the university level and in K through 12 settings. In addition to public screenings every year, where the dozen or so new stories we capture in any given year are screened and dialogues are unfold from that, with dinners or lunches involved in that. We've been at the county festivals. We've been invited to those different spaces and engaged community members and their children there, as well as youth storytelling activities in summer youth camps over the summer, and book club dialogues and book read sessions and again, with this intentionality of bringing community elders and leaders together with local youth and university students and so on. We also have web and social media campaigns we've launched across the county with YouTube channels and then again, those story walk campaigns as well. So a diverse range of outputs in addition to others. So just capturing a few there, as well as different kinds of publications on this. So we've got the research we're doing and the scholarly outputs, but as well as local articles on this work, regional articles, blogs that are being featured in the humanities, and then publications that are focused on helping other universities and educational communities think about how they can reimagine how we design curriculum, how we design interventions in our communities. There's also a range of partnerships involved in this, right? So we already talked about that. We've been partnered with diverse faith communities in our county, with different businesses, the ice cream shop, the coffee shops, restaurants, with different community centers, with our Parks and Recreation Department, with our local schools, with our cultural centers, and with our libraries. And so again, continuing to intentionally try to design partnerships across sectors here to create that kind of change. Dr. Marshall, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Absolutely. So, although this project was really driven by needs in the local community, part of those needs are just, again, telling stories that haven't been told and conducting research and scholarship on aspects of our shared history that have not been previously explored. And this has created opportunities for our undergraduate research students in programs like the honors program or other fellowship programs to pursue these lines of research that are valued by the community. And so just to give one example, I mentioned the Burlington Black Bottom Business District and how little had been written, how little documentation there was about this process of dismantling the Black Bottom. So one of our students who is part of a Power in Place collaborative course was inspired to continue exploring this issue and did so with an oral history project called Worth Remembering, Worth Street being one of the main thoroughfares of this district, and went about analyzing maps from that period, as well as any documentation she could find, and also oral history interviews with folks who remembered this area to try to piece together a story of Black Bottom. And so we continuously come up with new research questions that are driven by community needs, and we try to find students who might be able to pursue those questions in their own research. Which leads us to talk about our own interest in this, which is how has this collaboration between students, faculty, staff, our diverse community partners, how is this impacting not only students, but community partners themselves, us as faculty? How are we changing through the process of engaging in this ongoing collaboration? So we we are trying to track the impacts of this work over time in a longitudinal study. And part of this includes a material review. So analyzing the materials that the project has produced, as well as student reflections, looking at what are the similarities and differences in student experiences across different courses and different iterations of this project. We are making note of our own participant observation in this project. We continuously meet with our community partners, and we discuss what are the challenges that we're seeing. Where do sometimes values come into conflict, and what are the values that drive and lead this project. And then we've also sought to again do longitudinal surveys and interviews, so capturing the pre and post kind of experiences for students in surveys, as well as interviewing students sometimes a year or multiple years out from their initial exposure to this project and initial involvement as students in a Power in Place collaborative affiliated course. And we've had pretty good response rate with our interviews. We went through a round of interviews with students who took courses in 2020, 2021, and 2022, having a pretty decent response rate from those students for interviews. All of our collaborative members have been interviewed, several teaching faculty, as well as community storytellers. This was an initial round of research, and we plan to do future rounds as well in the coming year or so.
Oh, what's really great about what we learned from this initial round, and again, this is a set of researchers outside of us that are also helping us to conduct the interviews and analyze the data, is that across all participants, it was clear that this approach was one that was relational, that it was designed in partnership with community members, and that it emerges with their feedback every step of the way. We also found that it definitely was true that our perceptions of how to move this work forward, or the theories that we were carrying with us, were informing our practice, and that the lived reality of this was informing the way we thought the theory that we were bringing to it. So that reciprocity there, that the work's emergent and evolves. Like what we might focus on in the next years, what projects might come about, vary depending on what's happening there. And that we do see changes happening at different kinds of scales and in different ways. And we'll talk about that in a second. So we saw as well, for both community partners, for storytellers, and for faculty and students, that this shifted the way many of us were working, right? The way we were designing our courses, the way we were engaging with youth, that it changed the way we felt and thought. And it was, and again, our values, the mindsets that we were bringing to the work. And so that transformational power of that relational designing together work of storytelling seemed to be strong in what we were finding in the research. And all of this is also informed by this idea of equity-centered collective impact. So we can share a link in the chat box if you're interested. But the idea here is that as designers, as people trying to influence systems, we need to not just value creating structural change, which matters, but it also matters that we try to create changes in our places through relationships and through the way people think. Often it's easy to not value or seek that kind of change because it's harder to track, it's harder to visualize, it's harder to know if it's even happening, and it tends to take more resources. To change who's in power and who's making decisions and to cultivate relationships takes time, it takes energy. And then to change the way people think and feel and the way they live also takes a lot of time and energy. And again, it's harder to visualize. Whereas if you can say, we got a grant for this, we changed this policy, right? Like it's tangible, it's right there and it matters. But the research from this field is going to say that getting to that other level is even more powerful than that first level. So we have examples of how we've done this, right? We've seen a change in policy. So for instance, one of our courses at the beginning helped the African American Culture, Arts, and History Center create their board policies. This has also informed the way our own university is creating community agreements, right? This has been a model for others. We've been sought after. We've created approvals to create story walks in different venues and places in our community. We've changed the way people practice, the way curriculum is being designed, the way, what's being taught in the local schools. And we've also shifted resources. We've been able to leverage a lot of university resources and shift them in this direction, as well as receive state and federal funding. So pulling resources into the way we're designing history. It's definitely built relationships over time and shifted who's in power as we try to make decisions together. And we can talk more about that if you're interested. And then again, the research definitely shows, and I was shocked. I wasn't surprised to see that it shifted. I was hopeful and glad it shifted the way students think, but it absolutely changed the way faculty involved in the initiative were thinking about the community and about their role. And it shifted the way even community partners were thinking about. I loved the evidence showing that they were learning more, even though they knew so much already about the community and the people in it. And with that, perfect, I want to turn it over to Mr. Shields to share a little bit about his experience as a part of the collaborative.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lake. When I started this job about 2 years ago, I realized that a lot of the history of the African American community was not documented very well. I searched through a lot of books about the history of Alamance County and Burlington and just did not see a lot. And so as I dug deeper into the history, I also came to realize that apparently there was some, I guess, for lack of a better word, historical trauma that I think a lot of the community was just sitting on. And so in steps the Power in Place collaborative and this idea of the community being seen. And we have done a pretty good job, I think, of celebrating the stories of the African American community, now the Muslim community, the Latino community. And while we celebrate those people, while we celebrate those communities, we're also exposing the historical discrimination that was in the community. And it's been in a fairly subtle way, but again, it's been in a very powerful way because it's coming from the people. And so I really appreciate that. I spent about 20 years on the higher end, on the higher ed side of a community partnership. And so I have an idea of what we're looking for, but at the same time, now that I'm on the other side of that, relationship, I really appreciate what Elon has tried to do as an institution of higher learning. It's really easy to join a partnership like this. I think it's been referred to from a source of power because you have the resources, you have the PhDs, and you have all this. But yet, in this relationship, it hasn't been that way. I think what we see is a change in how we produce knowledge, who's involved in producing that knowledge. And so there's been a lot of respect given to the community. There's been a lot of opportunity for the community to be involved in the gathering of knowledge. There's been a lot of respect shown to the community for the knowledge that they have as we tell these stories. And I can tell you that when people come into the center or when they see the different stories that we have, the community is seen. And I think it helps to alleviate a lot of the trauma that we talked about earlier, because you have a community that, quite frankly, has not been seen for a long time. So I really appreciate this opportunity in terms of Power in Place, because it's really easy to do these interviews, and I think it was spoken to earlier. It's really easy to do a project like this, film the interviews and present at a conference like this, and then there it is. It's just sitting there, as opposed to the story walks that we have. This consistency of doing it, not just 1 year and then Elon is gone, right? And too many of us, especially when it comes to higher ed, we have a project or we have a grant, the grant runs out and then you're gone, right? And so that's not really a community partnership, to be honest with you, at least not one that I would value. And so I really appreciate just the vision of the project, that is long term, that it's not just a one-off thing. And the other thing is that I really do appreciate seeing that the students who come to Alamance County, most of them are going to spend at least 4 years here, that they have an opportunity to learn about the history, to learn about a community that, quite frankly, colleges make it hard for students to go out and learn about a community, because we create these bubbles, right? Because we want you to be safe. We want you to be at Elon or at Guilford College where I worked, or at UNCG or wherever. And a lot of times students don't get to learn about the communities that they're going to serve in, that they go out and they get jobs in or whatever. So I really appreciate that. And I guess the last thing I'll say is that uh, the stories that we have captured, I think, are very important. Ms. Jane Sellers has been very clear that this is not just for the African American community or not just for the Latino community. This is for everyone, and and especially members of the white community who, for whatever reason, have had these stories buried or they've been ignored. And so we have so many people to come in who are so grateful that these stories have come up and that we've provided a way to begin to talk about the way forward. And I think it really says a lot about Elon. It says a lot about our county that we're willing now to move forward. But of course, before we can move forward, we have to reconcile ourselves with our history. And so that's what I believe the Power in Place project is about.
Most definitely. And from a student perspective, it's everything that Dr. Shields has said. It has been a way for students who, if you don't have a vehicle, you have very little chance of getting to connect to your community. And despite the efforts that Elon makes in trying to bring the community to us, it's not as effective. So the Power Place Collaborative is essentially bridging those gaps across different parts of Alamance and getting to, as a student, getting to experience that originally as someone who was helping make the stories as part of a class, but now as someone who gets to work very closely with Dr. Lake and very closely with this collaborative and see these visions come to life, see these story walks, and see people begin to learn and grow and keep asking questions has been simply indescribable. And the best thing is just getting to appreciate the stories that you've been given. I'll never forget when I was doing my interview, I had the absolute pleasure of interviewing Reverend Dr. Covington. His picture is up on the top right corner. And his first words were, when I pass away, I want to have passed giving everything I can to the community around me and being empty in my tomb. And seeing someone so devoted to service as someone who wants to be of service to other people, it just catapulted my experiences and wanting to learn more about my community and wanting to give to the communities that I'm in.
And of course, there are challenges in this kind of work, right? It's been, like we said, we use the word emergent and complex and relational. So there's still times where we get stuck. Finding sustainable funding sources, right? Semester timelines, student schedules, student attrition, right? When they graduate, that if you're going to do relational placed work across generations, how do you sustain that momentum? How do you continue to build those relationships over time? Or hold those public events and keep attention on this to really get to that transformational level. And so we're still figuring some of that out, but there's been a lot of growth as well. What the research is going to show is that what you need to do this work successfully is you need to have a shared vision, a common agenda for what you want to achieve together. And so I think the vision that we have here and translating it into making sure we each understand and have that shared measurement processes. And so everything we do, we try to create reports, figure out who's there, what they got out of it, what they would like to see into their future, and then use that to strategize next steps. So mutually reinforcing activities, right? Like where we're meeting learning objectives and we're creating projects that yield value for other kinds of organizations and for the community, as well as staying in contact with one another over time, which is also incredibly hard with very different kinds of people across all different sectors within our community. And at the ground of that, the backbone team, which is again something that we're trying to cultivate over time, is how do we cultivate that backbone team to keep the momentum going? Their recommendations is to prioritize equity, center community members in the work. And so again, all of these stories, all of this work is co-created with community members. They own the stories and they decide what is shared and what is not shared. That we co-create these stories with our partners. So literally this coming week, we have our partners, our storytellers, our students coming together to make sure that that's happening. That you assess this work iteratively, like we keep coming back together and thinking about how we move that work forward. Cultivate systems leadership abilities. So again, in the assessment and research work we're doing, going back and asking students, asking partners and storytellers how this is supporting their own leadership abilities to do what they want. Implementing systemic strategies, which is so awesome about being at this conference and reading this work because it brings some of those strategies to us when we need them. And then that relational culture, which is incredible. Building those relationships between our storytellers and our community members and our students, all of it at a local level that can yield value in other systems. This also goes to how you create change at different levels. We tend to value scaling up, touching more and more humans, or scaling out, making sure this impacts other systems, but it's also really important to scale deep, which again gets to changing the way we all think, and then the way we act. Scaling SCREE is that other level where we value small incremental actions and design strategies that can yield value over time. So we have story books now, we have story walks now, and we see that people are scanning our QR codes and are accessing those things and are thinking about the ideas that emerge from those stories. Scaling across also matters, where again, we're getting into different nonprofits, we're getting into different businesses, and then we can impact all of those within our system. Scaling in, scaling long is a part of our efforts as well, that this exists beyond a singular course or a singular semester, but that it span time to create that change. This is about scaling infrastructure. So we're building frameworks that can last over time. And then scaling back is that opportunity we take to step back and reflect on the work we're doing and to take pauses in the work. And so there are flows to any given year of what we're doing where we can step back and reflect and then think about what we want to do in our future years. And there's a range of research, a lot of it coming from this organization, talking about these different layers of scaling. We have some examples. I just mentioned a few of them, but Dr. Marshall, I don't know if there's any others that you want to highlight here.
Sure, we can just kind of briefly mention some of these. So again, this idea of scaling up to larger scales, right? We've gone from a small pilot program with impacting a smaller audience of people now to every semester having large public forums that attract over 100 people. Also, more and more classroom courses involved in this, both at Elon as well as the local K through 12 communities. Out in terms of sharing our knowledge in different conferences. Other universities and other communities have approached us about, what are the ways in which they can use some of these strategies that we've learned here in their own contexts. Dr. Lake mentioned scaling deep, right? I think this has been one of the most impressive parts of this project, is just that how much I think all of our mental models have been affected by this, and how our sense of place and connection to community has really changed. But when I say us, I mean all the members of the collaborative, students, faculty, community members. Danielle mentioned SCREE, the ripple effects this project has had across a multitude of different spaces, thanks to the different outputs that this has created. And that across means that there's different partners who have been impacted by this work in positive ways. In terms of both, in thinking about I think this has changed a lot of our ways of approaching community-based work at our own institution here, and other institutions have also likewise reported that they're thinking differently about place. They're thinking differently about intergenerational communication and the importance of that. We're really tracking this work long-term, longitudinal, attitudinal change. Infrastructure also includes resources that are being shifted around to support this work. And again, back, right, this idea of reflecting back and looking at what we've achieved and thinking critically about where this can go next.